Hi, hello. I wanted to do a video on green steel because green steel, specifically green steel aggro, is the set free version was probably my favorite deck in Lorcana, the one that utilized Merfolk and Flynn and did aggressive questing. Mainly that's what it did. It aggressively quested, and then you also had the steel package and the discarding to keep everything in check so your characters can just quest out. And I really like that build. I only ever really dropped the deck because Bucky came around basically in set four, and I just didn't want to play Bucky. I thought it was slow and boring, and I just never enjoyed any of those games. But now that the Bucky rot is gone, and the Green Steel players had to adapt, and we saw in Vegas how well they adapted. We've got some awesome lists here, and I think I just wanted to sort of make a discussion or talk through maybe if someone wanted to hear about or doesn't understand like why green steels came back when it really wasn't talked about at all building up to the regionals. um, so yeah, with green steel coming back, or you seeing it a lot in the Vegas meta, and I'm pretty certain that going forward we're going to see a lot of it. There's two builds that mainly have survived, and I think two builds that not survived, two builds that are going forward. And I'd mentioned both of Zan, who won the event, and then I'd mentioned Bivens, who got top seed at the event. And there's minor details that are different in my opinion, but they do uh, sort of have an impact on the deck. Zan's build is not what I have on the screen. This is actually my own build that I've been playing for the last few days, and I'm really enjoying it. Zan's build was more based on Morph, and it was getting that aggressive shift with the Tinkerbell and the Beast, and it was just yeah, it was really strong mid range, could deal with anything, and then you got the discard package for the top end sort of heavier decks like Ruby Sapphire. And again, just discard in general is quite a problem for most Ruby Amethyst players. I think maybe the top ones like No I'm Not would know how to play around it, but in general, green steel is just known as something that is quite troubling for Ruby Amethyst. So yeah, overall it just has a really strong matchup, and of course the pilot of that deck as well was Zan, so that he just did amazingly, and it was such an awesome run. It's really interesting to watch. I'd recommend anyone watching the finals because he also goes through the interactions of things like the muses bouncing Diablo back to hand and causing discards. So basically hiding draws so that your opponent's Diablo doesn't see the draws, and then yeah, bouncing them because the way it's just watch the finals. It's really interesting. Um, and then the other version, of course. So the main thing that Zan's difference is they run the morph card, which the two cost yet, which can shift. The Bivens version has a Smee in it instead, and I think that's really cool. I just like Smee. The version that I would opt to want to play is, of course, one with Smee. This is the build that I've gone for here, and I've sort of just tended it down to Smee as a more aggro-focused build, and Morph is just a more mid-range general green steel build, and this is the one I've gone for. I've cut the Tinkerbells because I like to be able to ink to 5 and then just know all my top decks are playable from there. Smee is a great quester. Later on in the game, if you Pete and Smee, you can lock in some lore on the board. I think that's really cool as well. And then overall, yeah, Prince John is just gonna carry the deck through most of the play. Um, most of the gameplay, sorry. And I think that's another thing as well worth mentioning is that Prince John, I think because Bucky came around, was kind of forgotten about. The Bucky builds mainly focused directly on Diablo, getting them the card draw. Diablo, Tragic Beast, stuff like that. And I cut the Prince Johns just for space and uninkability. But overall, Prince John's just an insanely powerful card, and you pair it with a card like Hypnotize, which a lot of players have been doing recently, and in one turn you can get, if you say had some two cost singers set up and you had a Prince John set up, you could play Hypnotize, double sing, sudden chill, and get three cards out of their hand and be up, four cards because you get all the discard and then the Hypnotize. So it's just a really powerful card, and I think people are remembering how powerful it is. Again, I recommend watching the final with Zan. The Muses was just so impactful. So if you have a Prince John and a Muses, you basically have a board that's uninteractable. If you put a Hidden Cove in there, it's buffed even more. So grab your swords. This is generally against other steel decks. Against Ruby Sapphire, you want to be taking the Be Prepared out of their hand. Or things like Sisu as well. You want to just be discarding their hand and forcing them into a top deck mode. But yeah, it's just obnoxiously powerful, and it's just really good. Of course, as well, another factor to talk about why green steel, I think possibly has a bit more of a stronger setting than it did before. In previous sets in set four, um, what the natural killer of green steel was. And to be honest with you, I played this deck. I of course play blue steel a lot, but it was always viewed as the natural killer for green steel. Most blue steel players agreed they had a very strong game plan into blue steel into green steel, so they were sort of fine with that. And right now we're seeing not a lot of blue steel around. I mean, I took it to Birmingham, but it had such a low meta share, you weren't going to get tripped up by matched into one of these, or it was a very unlikely chance you were. If you brought green steel, you were going to get tripped up and played into a green steel and just tarnish your run there. So there's that factor as well. And then all the blue steel, of course, are just going to lose to a lot of the other meta and then fall down through the tables, or they just do amazingly if they're amazing blue steel players and pass through. Um, but yeah, it seems like green steel's bad matchups have gone away a little bit. It's very consistent what it does. It's discard, so it doesn't really have any prejudice against its matchups. I mean, the issues with blue steel is mainly they can reset at any time if they get the whole new world top decked. They play a really strong character like Cogsworth Ward. They've got Hero Draw as well. They've got Steel Removal, so they can do cheap answers to Diablo. They've got Grab Your Swords for Prince John. They've got a lot of answers for the deck, so that's why it's always viewed as the natural killer. What I found though in testing is those versions of Bucky discard that we'd seen before, they're very slow in what they do. They don't discard very heavily. There was a very consistent discard. It was set up Bucky, and then I'm going to play a Floodborn, then I'm going to play a Floodborn, and you just had to take into account that you were going to be losing a card a turn. And that's all you had to do. With this now, of course, we're back to getting an Ursula out, double seeing Sudden Chill, and then you've got Hypnotize as well to just rip that entire hand out. So if you're in a strong spot where you start, you play against a blue steel and you play an Ursula on 2, you rip a Whole New World or whatever song out of the hand, then you set up an Ursula on 3. Unless they're playing Smash or Tippoed into Zeus, the answers for the Ursula on 3 is very low, so they are very confident that they can play it out and it will dry. And then you can play the Prince John, double sing Sudden Chill. If you find another Sudden Chill, make the Ursula sing it. And then from there you can play a Hypnotize, or you can do whatever you want and basically just lock them out of the game. They might get a Cogsworth or something on board if they're lucky, but overall they're going to be playing with very few cards in hand. And now with a card like the Muses as well, you can just bounce a hero back to hand. Of course they can play it again, but that's just always awkward tempo to have to play it again. So I don't think this time around Green Steel is going to have such a bad matchup into Blue Steel. It doesn't feel in testing right now it's that bad. So yeah, that's kind of what's been going on with Green Steel. And I think going forward, of course, we're looking at Seattle and trying to predict how that meta is going to shape out. I think, of course, Green Steel is going to turn up. It's always turned up at events. It always does well. Really watch the player Dale, who's topped at every event he's played at with Green Steel, and just does consistently well, because what it does is what it does good. It's discard. It's hard to play against someone when they've just taken cards out of your hand. So yeah, I think we're not going to see a huge meta share change. I think people know Ruby Sapphire is good. Steel Song, I think the question is a little bit out there for Steel Song right now, because it didn't have such a good conversion rate. Some of the stream matches we got to watch where Steel Song just really wasn't in a good spot throughout most of them. It's quite high roll. But I think overall the metas won't change too much. Maybe Ruby Amethyst will go back up again because they want to feed on the Ruby Sapphire. But I think besides percentages here and there, we won't see much of a change. And I think conversion rates as well. Maybe more people will go for the Green Steel, and you might not want to worry about, you might not want to do mirrors, but that's just what happens. So yeah, I think overall, as powerful as this deck is, and it's going to hit the meta, and it's going to increase by parts in the meta share, I don't think we're going to see a situation where other decks come in to try beat that, like Blue Steel comes in to try and beat the Green Steel. I don't think that. I think Ruby Sapphire will still be at the top. Steel Song and Ruby Amethyst will be great followers behind. Green Steel will probably be a bit above the rest, but I think it's still just going to be where it's at. And then you've got the mixed match of everything else at the bottom as well, and people will still try their best to hyper aggro. But yeah, that's kind of what's really been happening with Green Steel. I hope some of that's helped.